28th, 1993. And we're here at the home of Russell Horner at 1011 or 1001 or
1005.
1005 West Pike Street, Crawfordsville, Indiana. And let me first say that I'm Bob Wernle. I'm on the Oral History Committee of the Montgomery County Historical Society. And the fellow that's doing the camera work today is Mike Hall. He's the executive director of the Historical Society. And we're interviewing Russell Horner, Russell M. Horner, who is one of the characters around Crawfordsville, who's been in the automobile business since before Adam. Now, what brings about this interview is that several years ago, Russell Horner was the speaker at the annual banquet of the Montgomery County Historical Society. And he gave a darn good talk on the automobile business in Montgomery County, Indiana, and the history of it. Now, unfortunately, we had tried to tape that speech that he made, but unfortunately, in the middle of the speech, the tape broke, and we never did get it down. So we've asked Russell to try to recreate that thing without the audience today. And I'm going to start out by asking Russell a few of the vital facts of his life about when he was born and where he was born and that sort of thing. Russell, why don't you take over now?
Okay.
Give us a little of that.
Well, Bob, I don't have any of the notes or anything of the original speech that I gave to the Historical Society, but I can tell you a few things about myself. I'm 82 years old, and I was born in Monon, Indiana. And I was born in 1910, and in the year 1910, my father became a Ford dealer.
Oh.
And at that time, well, let's see, what am I going to say here? He became a Ford dealer, and in 1913, he built the first garage building in White County.
It's Monon.
At Monon, Indiana. And by the way, the building was built out of Crawfordsville paving brick.
Oh, that, what was the name? Was that Post and Brick?
Post and Brick Company.
Okay.
And these paving bricks, when you laid them up in a wall, they just stood there forever, but the bricklayers just despised them because they were so heavy and they affected their wrists. And the first thing you know, they had to wear wrist guards. And the first thing you know, they had swollen wrists. Well, anyway, I'll tell you how I happened to come to Crawfordsville. My father, by the way, I was going to say he built this first building, and at that time, most of the auto dealers carried on business in the livery barns.
Oh, yes.
And, but anyway,
And those are probably just barns, as they say, wooden barns.
Not many of them. They're not. The livery barns just aren't around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, I happened to come to Crawfordsville just by chance. My father, in along about 1927, had an apartment house in Lafayette, across from the Monon Depot, and he met up with a Crawfordsville trader. I'd say he was a trader or a realtor, and his name was His name was Rank Walkup.
Rank Walkup.
I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not.
Yeah, he was a big Republican, wasn't he?
Well, I don't know about his politics, but I remember where he lived. He lived where Andy Foley used to live.
Out on East Main Street?
On East Main Street. That's where General Welliver lives now.
That's right.
And I remember coming down here and driving my father down, and I remember the house and the driveway and so forth. And anyway, he traded my father traded his apartment house in Lafayette for this garage building that's at 222 East Market Street. And
222, that'd be on the east side of the street. I mean, on the north side of the street.
North side of the street, right. And so everything went along just fine, but the Great Depression came along. And things got worse and worse and worse. And there was a Buick dealer in the building, and then there was an Oldsmobile dealer, and they went belly up, or at least quit. And then my father rented the building just to a man that was running a filling station across the street.
Russell, let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
Is that building still standing?
Oh yes.
What's in there now? Is that what?
That's where
your building is?
That's right.
Where the Horner building is now?
That's right. Yeah, the building was built in about 1919, and it was there was a local man that built it, and he later ran a gravel pit down here.
Kits?
On the way to Kits Gravel. No, not Kits.
Before Kits.
Well, it is before Kits, yeah. That's right. So anyway, by 1933, why this building was rented to a party, and they weren't paying the rent. And so I had graduated from the University of Illinois in 1932, and I was traveling on the road selling tear gas bombs, if you can imagine that. And in 1932, especially after we had the great, in February of 33, we had a bank moratorium, and all the banks in the United States were closed for a few days. And so there was a tendency for people to hoard money in their safes. And so this item was a hot item where you could put a tear gas bomb on your safe, and you could be fairly safe that a safe cracker couldn't get in it. So I was traveling all over the state of Indiana selling these bombs. And I went back to Lafayette, where we lived at that time, and my father said, Russell, why don't you go down to Crawfordsville and see what you can do? Maybe you get a dealership or something and see just what you could do down there. Said, I'll furnish. We got the building and they're not paying any rent on it. Says, you just well go down there.
Well, now, was your dad still a Ford dealer by this time?
Oh no, my father sold Fords from 10 years, from 1910 to 1920, but he still stayed in the automobile business, but he didn't sell Fords. He wasn't a Ford dealer.
Yeah. Okay, I interrupted you there, but go ahead. You're talking about the empty building and your dad wanting to put something in there.
Yeah, so I went down to see my uncle in Lafayette, and he was a Chevrolet dealer in Lafayette, and I said to him, well, what do you think would be the chances of making a go of a dealership down in Crawfordsville? And so we decided he said, well, what dealers are there now? And so I told him that they had a Ford dealer and a Chevrolet dealer and a Dodge dealer and a Chrysler dealer. Just had 4 dealers at that time. And would you like to know who those are?
Yeah, why don't you?
Yeah, well, when I came here in 1930, so anyway, I'll go back to my uncle first. And he said, so I said to my uncle, what do I do if I was going to go down to Crawfordsville to get a dealership? And so I told him that there was no Buick dealer here. It hadn't been since 1928, and Pontiac dealer had quit in 32, and there was no Buick and Pontiac dealer. And so my uncle said, well, that's all handled now by BOP, Buick Olds Pontiac, out of Chicago. And he said, if I were you, I would contact them. I sent them a telegram telling them I was interested. So, in being a dealer. So I went down to the Western Union office in Lafayette, and I sent a telegram to BOP Chicago, and I said, I am opening the largest garage in Crawfordsville, June 1. Well, I was going to open the door, but that's about all. There was no business. There's no business, but the door was open, and the building did. It is true, it was the largest building used as a garage in Crawfordsville. So I said, I am interested in the Buick and Pontiac dealership, period, and signed R.M. Horner. Well, they said, along about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just a couple hours later, here came a telephone call to me from Chicago, and they said, when could we see you, Mr. Horner? And I said, oh, about any time. He said, I and our assistant manager here in Chicago will be in Lafayette at your residence tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. It was so unusual that anyone who wanted to be in the automobile business that we really got some fast action. And so, sure enough, the next morning at 10 o'clock, I heard a doorbell ring, and I looked out, and there was a nice new Buick or Pontiac, whichever it was. I believe it was about the fanciest Buick that they made. I looked out the doors, and they said, I went to the door, and they said, well, we wanted to see Mr. Horner. And I was 23 years old, and I said, well, you wanted to see my father, or you wanted to see me? Well, he says, well, I want to see your father about the Buick Pontiac dealership in Crawfordsville. And I said, well, I'm the one that's interested. And they were quite surprised when I said that I was the one who was interested. So years and years later, I met Mr. Wampler, who was he was the manager in Indianapolis, and he told me, he said, say, Horner, you know, he said, I'll tell you something funny. When they came down from Chicago and they saw you, they were so surprised and everything, said, and we filled out all the papers and sent them into the Eastern office to be okayed. They said that he said, dear Wampler, you're kind of robbing the cradle, aren't you? Well, if you did, at my age, I guess, if I'd have been older, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have been down there being a dealer, because I'd known it was not a very
not a good business proposition.
Not of a good business proposition, and so anyway, they that was the start of the thing, and time they got me signed up and time I got a car was along about the 10th of June of 1933. And this is sure hard to realize now.
Yeah.
But in 1933, a new Pontiac 8-cylinder had the full list price of $765. And they had a few extras that you could buy. And if you wanted a right-hand sun visor, and if you wanted a right-hand tail light, and if you wanted a dual horn in place of just one horn, it cost $13.95 extra for the 3 accessories, if you can imagine it. And a Buick only cost $1,050 for a fancy Buick 4-door sedan.
Well, go ahead. I'm interrupting you.
Well, I tell you, Mr. Wernle, we don't happen to have any of those 1933s for $765 now.
Tell us about, Russell, you were pausing a little bit ago. You're going to tell us about what other dealers were here when you got here.
Well, to tell you, we had a Ford dealer. His name was Perry Lewis. And
was Perry back that far? Oh,
well, it was not the Perry we know now that's the dealer.
You mean the father?
He's the father of Perry Lewis. That's the Ford dealer in Frankfurt now.
That's right.
And then he was the father of Gene Lewis, who was a dealer at Lebanon, and who's now died.
Yeah.
And then he was the father of John Lewis, that later became the Ford dealer here. Yes. And then there was O.K. Galloway.
Oh, he was a character.
He was a character, and he sold Dodge and Plymouth. And then there was a gentleman named, older man, named Charles F. Van Dyke that sold Chrysler. And he had a storeroom down on Market Street about where the Oates accounting office is now.
Oh, right near your place.
Yeah, it was the same block. And Charlie was a fine gentleman and well liked, and everyone liked Charlie. But I tell you, when you bought a car from Charlie, he didn't have much of a service department to back it up. And they always kind of kidded Charlie because they said, and it was true too, that if anything that Charlie could fix with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver, he would go out in front of his place of business on the street and make the adjustment right there. And if he couldn't fix it with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver, he just didn't get fixed. It was just too bad. So anyway.
Well, where were these other dealerships?
Oh, the other dealerships were Montgomery. The Chevrolet was sold by a company called Montgomery Motor Company, and they were located where the Library Edition is now.
Oh, yeah, where Paul Tippett was for a while.
Where Paul Tippett was, and later Herman Davis.
Yeah.
And it was the manager of the Montgomery Motor Company was a gentleman named John White, but the ownership was a man named Bill Hare from Noblesville.
Oh.
And there still is a Hare dealership in Noblesville. You see it on TV quite frequently. And then the oldest of all the dealers was Mr. Eder from Newmarket, and he'd been the
He's still in the. I mean,
that's right. Eder went became the Ford dealer in Newmarket in 1920, and he was still at Newmarket. And then Ladoga, we had a gentleman named Les Warner, and Les Warner and Herman Davis, and Herman Davis then was the Chevrolet dealer, and Warner was the Ford dealer.
Were there any other dealerships in, for instance, Wingate or Waveland or any place like that?
Well, in 1933, no, but there had been a Chevrolet dealer down at Waveland. His name was Ben Canine, and he was there for quite a few years and stayed open on Sundays which is now illegal for an auto dealer. And he sold them to people that on their way to Turkey Run. They'd stop in there to get gasoline or their tire repaired or something, and then that's where Ben sold most of his cars.
At Waveland.
At Waveland.
What about, was there ever a dealership at Darlington, for example?
No, to my knowledge, there were some used car dealers in Darlington, but no new car dealers that I knew of.
Yeah. Now, where does, of course, Bill Combs was a legend around here. Where does he fit into this picture?
Well, Bill Combs was probably the greatest mechanic that ever hit Montgomery County. And he was well liked, and he was a splendid mechanic. And Bill was a good friend of mine, and I thought so much of him. Bill had one trouble that bothered him for years, and he had the idea that he could drink all the whiskey in Montgomery County. And he tried that for about 15 years, and he found out he just couldn't get it done. And all at once Bill met a lady, Dolores, and she helped him dry out, and Bill was a fine gentleman after that. But Bill was just could read in the motor literature and the service manuals, and figure out how to figure out anything about cars. And of course, cars were more simple in those days too. They weren't. It was before the computers and a lot of things like that. But he never was in the sales end. He was in the service end.
Now, did you have a service? You had a service department with that dealership. Who'd you have set up to do your service?
Well, let's see. I tried. Well, one of the early dealers. One of the other people that worked for me was a man named Frank Marsteller, and then another person that worked for me as a service manager was Raymond Smith, and he was a brother of John Smith.
John
you
Smith
probably know.
That worked for you.
And John Smith later worked for me as a parts manager, and also later as a salesman.
Mm-hmm. Now, your dealership, as you set it up, was both a Buick and a Pontiac dealership.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead, Russell. I interrupted you.
Well, I'm going to put in 2 cents worth right here before I forget. If my father hadn't gotten me started financially and backed me, I never could have made it.
Mm-hmm.
I never could have. They wouldn't have made me a Pontiac Buick dealer, because a young man 23 years old, if he doesn't have someone that encourages him and backs him financially, you just cannot get started in a business unless you got somebody that's going to be behind you and help you out. My father came down here from Lafayette, and he went down to the First National Bank, and he showed him a financial statement, and they checked it out up at Lafayette and found it was correct, and he signed an agreement that he would be responsible for any debts, for any money that I would borrow, up to $10,000. And in 1933, when a new car sold for $765, why $10,000 was some little sum.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have ever got started if it hadn't have been for my father. Mm-hmm. And it's been my experience that there isn't anyone can just lift himself by his bootstraps unless he has to have someone that's behind him, encouraging him and helping him financially.
Russell, now I take it by this time, were you married by this time?
Oh no, I wasn't married till the next year. I waited about a year. It was about a year later that I got married.
Did you marry somebody from locally or from up where you came from?
Oh, I tell you, I married a Montgomery County girl, and her name was Maxine Ward. Mm-hmm. And I had met her, and she went to DePaul 3 years, and then she went to Illinois her 4th year, and graduated from the University of Illinois the same year that I did. And I didn't meet her and have any dates with her when I was in school at the University of Illinois. And but when I came to Crawfordsville, I had met her through a friend in Champaign, and so I called her up and told her I had come to be in Crawfordsville and was going to be in the automobile business, and she didn't seem to be one bit excited about it. But I went down to her house and saw her anyway. And
where did she live at that time, Russ?
Well, she lived on, wait a minute, College Street. You know, it's College Street, just east of Washington Street.
Okay.
And her father was a local grocer at that time. Uh-huh. At that time, Crawfordsville didn't have all these big chain stores, and they had must have had about 15, at least 15 local grocery stores. Mm-hmm. And her father ran the cash carry grocery store.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Down next to right near to being her building there.
Yeah. In fact, it's where the Union Federal Building is.
That's right.
There.
That is true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Well, now we're getting off the track here from the automobile business.
Say, yes, that's right.
You were starting to tell us about the other dealers in town and who they were. Tell us a bit about, what about O.K. Galloway? You got any stories about O.K.?
Well, O.K. Galloway, I tell you, he had an iron constitution. O.K. Galloway would work all day, and somebody would take him to Lafayette, and he'd get a train out of Lafayette at midnight, and he'd go to Detroit, and he never went on a Pullman, just rode a stagecoach and slept the best he could. And he got up to Detroit, he'd take a taxi out to the Dodge plant, and he'd bring back a new Dodge, and back of that he'd have a tow bar, and he would attach this tow bar to a Plymouth and drive it back and tow it back. So he'd get back in with 2 cars, and he'd get home and just go right back to work. He seemed never got tired and never wore himself out.
They used to tell that story about O.K. Wasn't he a dealer over at West Point or sometime?
No, not West Point. He was a dealer in Waveland.
Waveland? Well, the story that he used to tell that I have heard about him is that these people order these tires from Montgomery Ward's.
Oh,
that story.
Oh,
Tell us
yeah.
about that one.
Well, I'll tell you about that story. That story was told to me, and I know it was true because there used to be a man down in Waveland that fixed clocks, and I can't think his name now.
Bonda?
Bonda.
Okay.
B-A-N-T-A. And O.K. ran a garage in Waveland and sold Overland and Willie's Knights automobiles. And so in about 1917 or 1920, along in there, they brought electricity to Waveland. Before that, they just had coil lamps. Well, everyone that was an up-and-coming auto dealer immediately got an electric air compressor. And someone coined the word free air. So they piped the air out to a stand, a post of some kind out, or a pole out in front of their building, and that was their air that ran back to the air compressor. Well, down at Waveland, OK bought him an air compressor as soon as they had electricity, and he put in the air, and he was quite up to date, you know. But he noticed that the farmers around Waveland sent to Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward to get their tires, and then they would carry them down to OK's place and borrow OK's jack to jack up their car, and borrow his tools, his tire tools, to take the tire off the wheel. And then they would leave the paper that was wrapped around the tire, they'd leave that there and leave his jack out on the street instead of putting it back. And OK was pretty much disgusted at that. You know, they didn't buy their tire through him or from him. They got most of their tires from Sears and Roebuck, but they went there to get the free air. So there was an itinerary sign painter that came through Waveland one day, and he went into Galloway's, and he said, do you have any signs you need to get painted? Would you like to have painted? And Galloway said, yes, I do. So they got an old sign and painted it over, and this is what they put on the sign: if you get your tires at the post office, get your free air there also. And I tell you, and then that was OK's sign, and that was a true story.
Bonda told you that story?
And Bonda told me that story because he was a local resident down there and knew OK real well.
What about some of the other dealers that you knew? You mentioned the fellow that sold the Chrysler at Van Dyke, or what?
Yeah.
And or any of the others that. Well, let's turn to your notes here, Russell, and see if we've missed anything that you meant to talk about.
Well, I'll tell you a story about. I'll tell you a story right here. When cars came to this area, I suppose in 1910, for instance, when my father first started in the business, I would have no proof of this, but I would say I don't imagine in the whole Montgomery County that there were over 50 vehicles, 50 automobiles. And anyway, the thing that only men drove cars, and because they had to crank them, and ladies couldn't manipulate cranking a car, but their husbands did. And so what really changed the situation and made the automobile part of our economy was Charles Kettering, known as Boss Kettering of General Motors. By the way, Boss Kettering and Sloan were the ones that established the wonderful cancer research in New York. And anyway, Boss Kettering invented the electric starter in 1913 and put it on the Cadillac automobile. And the next year, 1914, Buick had it. But Ford didn't put them on the Model T Ford till about 1919. And so this story was told to me by a salesman I had at one time named Tubby Chambers.
Tubby Chambers.
Tubby Chambers.
Yeah.
And he said that in 1919, his father had a Ford touring car, and he'd taken good care of it, and it was in excellent shape, but it didn't have a starter, and he had to crank it by hand. So anyway, salesman for the Ford dealer at that time went out to see Tubby's father about trading cars and getting the starter, and he had a new Ford out there, and he every once in a while would turn the key on and put his foot on the starter and start the car, and then he'd turn it off and do that over and over again as they discussed about why he should buy a new car. And finally, Tubby Chambers said to Mr. Cox, the salesman, Lige Cox, said, "Now I'll tell you, Lige, that starter is just mighty, mighty fine. And I think it'd be a nice thing to have. But Tubby Chambers, there is anybody that is too lazy to crank their own car doesn't deserve to have one."
Well, Russell, you and I lived when you used to have to crank a car. I can remember having a Model T that had to crank.
Of course you did, that's right. You remember, well then you knew about the 3 pedals.
Oh, sure.
The left one was the clutch, and the center was the reverse. And the right was the brake. And if the brake didn't work, you used the middle one. And that was the reverse, and
that's right.
That really stopped you then.
What were some of the other makes of cars around? You've mentioned the common ones, but there were lots of other off-brands.
My father started out selling Fords, but he couldn't, finally after he got started, he couldn't get enough Fords. And he could sell other cars too, so my father over the years sold some of these cars that I remember. He sold the Interstate, he sold the Dort, he sold the Studebaker, which was made in South Bend. He sold the Lexington, which was, and the slogan was Lexington Minuteman 6. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Studebaker was one, and he sold Oldsmobiles too, and he sold Mitchells, and in those days you just go to the factory, and if they didn't have a dealer in the town, why they just made you a dealer right then, and you're in business.
You spoke about how OK got his automobiles going up to Detroit. Did you used to do that too?
Well, when I started out as a dealer, I would drive the cars out of the factory because we could drive them down from the factory, and we put a tow bar back of the car. You would go to a place called Tow Bar Bill's that was out near in Detroit and Pontiac, near the factory plant, and you'd rent it for $15, and they'd hook it up for you, and then as soon as you got home, you'd go down to the American Express and send it back to them. And that was quite a saving.
$15?
$15 they charged it to rent the tow bar. Mm-hmm. You could rent it for up to a week's time for $15.
Mm-hmm. And you did that, so you did traveling up to Detroit too?
Oh, my, yes. That's right.
How many trips a year did you have to make?
Well, sometimes we'd get maybe 4 cars at a time, and sometimes we would, then we'd take people with us to drive them back, and and then of course we had a place in Indianapolis on 1300 North Worthing Street where You could get them out of a warehouse there. There was a General Motors warehouse. Right. I might tell you a collection story.
Oh, good.
One time, there was a man who lived here in Crawfordsville, and we sold him a new car, and he didn't keep his payments up each month as he was supposed to. About every 6 weeks, he'd pay a payment after we'd sent him several notices and so forth. And finally, he got quite delinquent with his payments, and we would look at the books to see how much he owed on his car, and we'd think, well, now what's the value of that car? And so finally it got to be the point where we'd better go get that car because it was worth just about what he owed on it. And so I went out to see him one day. We'd written him lots of letters. Went out to see him one day, and no one home. So I waited another day or two and went to see him, and no one home. So on a Saturday morning, I went out again to see him. And lo and behold, as I got near his residence, I could see him right ahead of me. I recognized the car. So I just followed him right on into his driveway, and I pulled my car up right back of him. And I said, I came about a payment on the car. He says, why, Horner, I can't make a payment now. He says, I've been on my vacation up at Monticello. And he says, I don't have any money now. And I said, well, say, you know, I think it'd have been better off, you'd have been better off staying home and making a payment on this car and not going up to Monticello on a 2 weeks vacation. And just then he turned to me and he says, I says, I'm going to take your car in. And I said, do you want to get anything out of the trunk or out of the glove box? And he said that no, he didn't. And then he turned to me and he says, Horner, I want to tell you something. We poor devils are entitled to a car just the same as you rich sons of bitches. Well, I tell you, I thought about that a whole lot, that he thought I was rich, and he was sure mistaken. But anyway, anytime it's rather funny that somebody that isn't wealthy at all, somebody else thinks they're well heeled. And I never forgot that what he told me.
Well, did you get the car?
Oh yes, I got the car, and
now you had your own car.
I just backed it out in the street, locked it up, and drove the car away. And by law he could have picked up the car. I had to hold it 10 days before it was
saleable.
I could take it and sell it, but he never did show up with any money, so
You've sold it.
I had to sell the car to somebody else. Yeah.
Did you have problems with other problems with payments back in those days, just like you do now?
Well,
how did you finance those cars? How did they finance them? Did you do it yourself?
Well, I did. As I was able to accumulate money, I borrowed money from the old First National Bank, and then I financed it. Because at that time, the First National Bank didn't. If you mentioned at a bank that you're buying an automobile, they wouldn't loan you the money. No, sir. And I remember. Do you remember Will Collins at the First
sure.
National Bank?
Yeah, he had that peculiar complexion, the purple man.
Well, you mean he looked like he was dead and dug up? Well, anyway, he was a fine gentleman, and he was an attorney, you know.
Yes, I knew.
He came to Crawfordsville as an attorney, and then later went into the bank. So one day I went down about just about a couple second or third year after I had come to Crawfordsville, and I traded for a real nice, about a 3-year-old Oldsmobile from a Standard Oil dealer at Roachdale. And so a farmer came in, a nice farmer, and he looked at this Oldsmobile and he just fell in love with it. So to make it a long story short, he traded in his car, and he gave me a conditional sale note for about $400. And so I took the conditional sale note down to the First National Bank, and I sold it to him. And because it was the farmer plan, which they called in those days, it was supposed to be paid in 3 months, 6 and 9, called the farmer plan. 3, 6, and 9 months. Well, to make a long story short, I sold that paper to the First National Bank, and at the end of 3 months, he had his first payment due, and he came in to see me, and he said, "Horner," he said, my hogs got the cholera, and I lost all my hogs. And he says, "I can't pay the first payment." And so I said, "Well," I said, I sold that note, as you know, to the First National Bank, and I'll have to go to the bank and see what they think about it, what they want to do, and maybe we'll just have to take your car, and I'll have to pay off the note at the bank, and that'll be it, or maybe I can talk them into giving you another 3 months, like you say. You think in 6 months you can make quite a nice payment." So I went down to the bank and I saw Will Collins, and I told him the story. He said, "Oh yes, I know that man, Horner. I know that man." He said, "He's honest as the day is long. But I'll tell you one thing, Horner. That man will never be financially sound. And I'll tell you why." He said, "You know, last year he bought a corn picker and paid $1,025 for it. And he said, you just can't farm and buy a piece of equipment and spend $1,000 for it." And today they have these implements that pick corn and harvest other crops, and nothing at all, that they sell from $75,000 to $100,000. And poor old Will Collins, if he could see some of those machines, what they cost today, he would turn over in his grave, wouldn't he?
What'd you do? Did that farmer get to keep the car?
Will told me, he said, "I tell you, let's give him 6 months and see if he can make it." And so we did, and he paid out every dime on that car. Paid it out.
What kind of interest payments were you charging?
Oh, I think at that time it was about 8% interest, simple interest.
Russell, being in the law business, and from time to time we have to take some of our payments in kind, and I'll bet you done the same thing in the automobile business. Did you have sometime you'd have to take a cow or a horse or something for a payment?
No, I never did, but my father used to trade for livestock when he started in 1910, and then he would put them out on a farm near Monon, and then once every spring he'd have a big sale and sell this livestock at an auction.
But you didn't. You never had to take things in kind for a.
No, I never.
Like a doctor used to. The doctors used to do that. Somebody would offer them a pig or something like that for a payment.
Well, I just never did. But one time I was selling a car to a man, selling him a new Buick, and he was a well-to-do farmer. and he made me an offer on how much he would pay. And I said, well, you know, I tell you, I appreciate your offer and everything, but I said, you know, there's just no gravy in that deal for me at your price. I just have to have another $100 because of what you're offering me, there's just no gravy in the deal at all. Well, you know, I didn't think much about it. I'd only been married a year or two, but that's the next Saturday, that man's wife, who had heard the conversation, she came down and she gave me the nicest dressed chicken you ever saw, and said to me, he said, take this home and have your wife make you some gravy, which I did.
But did the guy get the car?
And what?
Did he get the car?
Oh yeah, he bought the car because he went up another 100, and that made enough so I could trade with him.
Okay. All right.
Yes, sir.
What about some of the characters that you've had to deal with? Some of the customers, the hagglers.
Well, everybody does a little haggling, you know, and there's a tendency to among dealers to put the price down at a certain price and say no haggling. But it's been my experience that there are certain people that whatever you ask them, they just won't pay what you ask them the first time. They just got to have some knocked off or they won't buy it. That's all there is to it. And so I think that I'm going to keep on haggling. I'm going to keep on doing a little better, you know, cutting the price a little, talking to like the customers want me to talk.
Okay. You got some more notes there, Russell?
Well, I got some notes, but I'll tell you, I got one here that has nothing to do with me, but it has to do with the times in Crawfordsville in 1920. You remember Jack Alexander, the ophthalmologist?
Sure.
Well, anyway, Jack told me this story, and I'll pass it on to you because I think you'll get a kick out of it. Jack Alexander's father went down to Ladoga and bought a Model T sedan from a Ford dealer in Ladoga, and part of the deal was that the dealer was supposed to teach Mrs. Alexander how to drive. So sure enough, the next day they brought the car up from Ladoga, and this salesman for the dealer went out to the park and drove around through the park and took about a half an hour and taught Mrs. Alexander to drive that Model T Ford. And the next morning, his mother got up and took Jack, and they went out to that Model T, which had a starter by 1920, and they drove his mother drove that car to Chicago. Got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and drove that car to Chicago, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon she drove the car up to the Morrison Hotel, which was a quite famous hotel in those days. And she, with just a 1 hour's driving lesson, she got in that car and drove it to Chicago. And today, you know, you didn't. In those days, you didn't have to have a driver's license. You didn't have to have insurance. You just had the car, and that was it. And I started driving by myself when I was 12 years old, and so did all other boys around my neighborhood.
I did too.
And you did too.
We had no. I was from Illinois. We had no driver's license.
No driver's license, and there was no age limit on how old you're supposed to be to drive.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, all my friends my same age drove too.
Yeah. Russell, what about you haven't said anything about the roads? The roads must have been terrible.
Well, you know, people in the early days would start out and the roads were all through Indiana. Indiana had better roads than Illinois at one time, because Indiana was noted for its gravel roads, because they had a lot of gravel pits. And well, anyway, you'd start out and you'd go down to the second crossroad, and there's a schoolhouse there, a little red schoolhouse, and you turn to the right, and then you go down and you cross a big bridge, and then you turn to the left and so forth. And you'd have to, if you didn't know the road, you had to stop along the highway and ask other people how you got to so and so.
They had these blue books, didn't they, or what did they call them? These little books.
A little blue book, and it would tell you all that instruction. So if you did a lot of driving in strange territory, you'd be smart to have a blue book. All the traveling salesmen had a blue book. They know right where to turn and where to cross the bridge and so forth.
Yeah. What about the roads right here in Montgomery County, though? What were the roads to and from the county, and what about the city streets? Were there some pretty well paved streets, or what was the city?
Well, when I got to Crawfordsville in 1933, we had pretty good streets and we had pretty good roads, and we didn't have a paved road between here and Lafayette, but it was a state highway, and it was a well made highway. So we had
gravel.
It was gravel though, gravel, and the only paved road in the country around here was that when you went to Jamestown, out about the first 2 or 3 miles, it was a brick road.
That is at the old Indiana 130.
It'd be 136.
136.
That's right, and it was I think that someone was they accused. The word went around that some commissioner had that brick street put in, a brick road put in.
A brick road all the way to where?
Well, it was after you left New Ross. You'd hit a brick pavement going to Jamestown.
Now, you mentioned Virgie Alexander going to Chicago. Now, how would she get there? What road would she take?
Well, I never. When Jack told me this story, I never asked him what highway she took.
But was there a good road to Chicago?
Well, there were gravel roads, just gravel roads. There were no paved roads. But
I suppose you'd go up through Lafayette, though, would you?
Well, I mean, that would be in the general direction anyway.
Yeah. Well, now, when you went to Detroit, I suppose you went to Lafayette and then up through Logansport and that way?
Well, we went in. We would go to Detroit we'd go to Lafayette and take the Wabash Railroad.
Okay.
Going up, and then we'd drive back.
Okay. What about the city streets, though? Were there paved city streets?
Well, there were. When I came to Crawfordsville, we had paved streets in Crawfordsville.
Which streets were? There were, I suppose, some dirt streets around too, though, or gravel streets, gravel roads.
Well, as I remember, they were pretty well. They were pretty well paved streets, the main streets in Crawfordsville.
Now we've got a section of brick, post and brick down there near your Horner's place. What does that date back to those days? I'm talking about that section there, north or south of the old Farm Bureau building, where that brick pavement is. Is that near the Monon station? You know, there's a big, wide, paved brick place there, coming off from, going east from Washington Street over to the Monon station there.
Oh, well, that when I came to Crawfordsville, that brick was there, and I don't know just why it was, but you see that Washington Street and that brick highway was where the first Crawfordsville electric light plant was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then this other was the Krabs Reynolds Taylor elevators and storage facilities.
Building there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the only brick street around anymore that I can think
Yeah.
of.
I suppose that the good streets were paved with brick, and were they?
Oh yes, yes. The first good streets were paved by brick.
Poston brick.
Well, I imagine being in Crawfordsville, the Polstons, yes.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a little break here, Russell, and
the story. Did you ever know Fred Radcliffe?
yes, he was did he sell Oldsmobiles, or what did he sell?
Well, he sold cars for me, and he sold cars for Charlie Van Dyke. He sold Chryslers for Van Dyke, and then he worked for me for 10 or 12 years. His wife is still living. I see her out to the Holiday Inn all the time. Well, anyway, Fred was trying to sell a car to a man, and he came to me because he was pretty much short of a down payment, and his credit report didn't show too well, and wasn't too satisfactory. But Fred Radcliffe, he insisted that he'd known this man for a long time, and he was a young farmer, and he would pay for the car, the used car we were selling him. So the car was delivered, and after several payments, why, this man was on the delinquent list. So I never will forget one Monday morning I went to work, and I guess I wasn't in a very good mood. And I called in to Fred Radcliffe, and I said, Fred, I want you to go out to so-and-so's place and get a payment, get some money. I've written him letters and sent him notices, and he hadn't paid a penny. So after about an hour, Fred came back, and he came into my office, and I said, well, did you get that car? Or did you get any money? No, I didn't get any money. No, I didn't get the car. Well, so Fred said, I want to tell you my experience. He said, I went out there and I knocked at the door, and the man's wife came to the door, and she was just about 8.5 months pregnant. And I told her that I wanted a payment on the car, and she said that they couldn't make any payment at that time. And then Fred said, well, I've got orders from Mr. Horner to take the car in. And she began to cry, and she said to Fred, oh my goodness, what if all at once I'd get some some pains, and I'd have to go to the hospital. I wouldn't have this car to go, and what would I do? And said she began to tears just rolled down her cheeks. And Fred says, I thought of my daughter Orwilla, and I thought of everything like that, and well, Russ, if you want that damn car, you'll just have to go get it yourself.
But Russell didn't go and get it.
I didn't go get it, and we later got our money. We finally got our money. Well, anyway, I don't know why I can think of some of those things.
Yeah, well, those are things that stick in your mind. What about the war years, and how it affected the automobile business? That was right after the Depression.
Well, there were some pretty good years in there before the last cars that were made were 1942 models.
Mm-hmm.
And after the war really was declared between Germany in Japan, all the new car stock that dealers had were frozen. And you couldn't sell them. And they came out with a whole lot of instructions on what you had to do to store these cars. You had to jack them up off of the floor so that their tires wouldn't become injured. And you had to drain the oil out, and you had to put special oil that they had you procure, and you put this special oil in them in the engine block, and then you had to take and you had to put wax paper over the carburetor so no air moisture could get down in the engine. And we called them putting them to bed. And it took I suppose I don't remember exactly now, but it took at least 4 or 5 hours to put one of these to fix these cars so you could what we call put it to bed. And we had cars stored. We even had some cars stored out of Lindsborg in the building. Mm-hmm. And any buildings that were not being used is where we stored these cars. And then the only time we could sell them was they had to go before the rationing board and get an okay. Mm-hmm. And that was that didn't take place until I suppose 6 months after they had been stored. And
did you do any business at all during the war?
Oh yes.
Repair work or what?
Oh yes. We learned about all the good junkyards around and where to get used parts. And of course we ran out of the new parts just practically right away. Mm-hmm. And then we lost most of our younger mechanics.
Went to the service.
And they were drafted or enlisted, and I was drafted into the Army, and in 1943. And
at what age?
Well, and see, I was 33 years old. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, my dealership stayed in business because I had a man that I'd done business with named Bud Martin, and he had been with me for several years, and he was a fine young man and honest as he could be, and he was the manager of my business. And
I remember Bud.
And my business stayed open, you see, and I never quit. I stayed in business, and then we bought used cars. And I personally, the first time we bought used cars, as people went to the Army, a lot of them would have a car and they'd want to sell it. And sometimes they'd have a car that maybe was a year old in good shape, and we'd give them as much or more than what we'd sold it to them for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And before I went to Pittsburgh and found that because they had gas rationing in Pittsburgh before we had it here, and I put ads in the Pittsburgh paper, and I was staying in the hotel, one of the main hotels in Pittsburgh, and here I went down and left my hotel number, and I said, man from the West wants to buy extra fine, low mileage used car. Price no object.
Oh.
And I got so many answers that it blocked the telephone in the hotel. And they couldn't get in, they couldn't get out. because all these people were coming in wanting to sell their cars, coming in on the telephone. And brother, did I catch hell from the hotel.
Yeah.
Because I just looked up the phone number and the Pittsburgh paper took it, and it just blocked their telephones for a couple, 3 days. And then later, so I didn't do that anymore, and they sure told the newspaper not to take any ads like that too. And then I'd go to Pittsburgh. I went to Pittsburgh one time, and stayed 6 weeks, and I must have bought 30 or 40 used cars, and I found that the Pittsburgh people were wonderful people. And Pittsburgh is in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and they have a wonderful, at that time they had a wonderful streetcar system and bus system, mostly streetcar though. And so they got along pretty well, and they could get along pretty well without having a car.
Yeah. Well, now this, the war service then, in 43 you went into service?
I went into service in 43, right.
Well, you were in the cavalry, were you?
Well, when I was going through I got my papers, you know, from the government, from my friends, you know,
yeah.
Called me in.
Walter Spencer.
Well, Walter Spencer was head of the draft board, and well, anyway, I went over to the Fort Benjamin Harrison, and several other people had been going over, and they had flat feet, or they had this or that. Why they turned them down. So I went over and felt pretty good, because I thought, well, I've always had flat feet and had trouble with my feet. Well, I went over there, and I remember got back to got into the place, you know, and the first thing they said, take off all your clothes. And everybody stripped down naked as a jaybird. And then I'll swear they didn't do a thing for you or to you for about 2 hours. And you just sat there on a bench, stripped as naked, and it was just, by that time you got cold, you know, sitting there naked as a jaybird. We were all scared to death, and never experienced anything like that. And so finally it took a few more examinations, and I found out that I had passed. And a psychologist was one of the persons I went to, and he said, well, this was before before I'd taken my oath to be admitted. And I said, Mr. Horner, what did you do in civilian life? And I said, well, I was in the automobile business. He says, you were? I said, yes, I was in the automobile business. He said, well, they'll probably put you in the horse cavalry. And so it just happened that my people that were good friends, they shipped out to other places, and I had to stay in because they didn't have any shoes to fit me. And so I had to stay over there, and I had to work in the what do you call, the orderly room. And I had to work in the orderly room, and I had to pass out towels and mattress covers. We didn't have sheets, you know. The Army never used any sheets. You just slept on a mattress cover. And so by the time that I got my shoes, why, I got on a train and started west, and I didn't know where we were going because they never told you. But we could tell by looking along the way that first town we recognized was St. Louis, and then the next thing, here we were up at Fort Riley, Kansas. And I was in the, what we call the, I was in the CMTC, Cavalry, CRTC, Cavalry Replacement Training Center.
Yeah.
And I was in the, I took, in the cavalry at that time, they told us that we were all going to be specialists. And some would be a messenger, and they would ride a motorcycle, and they would also learn the Morse code. And then they said there were others were going to be cooks and bakers. And then they made the group I was with a clerk, and I learned how to fill out morning reports and all that kind of stuff. And I could type. I had taken typing in high school, so I was a hot number because I could type. And brother, was I glad to get inside now the weather and warm where I had my office. And I later became an instructor in the motor mechanic school.
You knew a little bit about automobiles.
Yes, I did.
And when did you get out of the service?
Well, I got out
Did you stay at Fort Riley?
I never did ship out of Fort Riley.
And when did you get out of the service then?
I got out of the service in about September of 1945.
Came back to your dealership, and by that time, it was still going pretty good, was it?
Yes, they were well organized, and
but no new cars.
No new cars. That's right.
When did you start getting new cars?
Well, the cars were allotted to you on the basis of what you'd done in the year 1941.
Mm-hmm.
On that basis.
And when did they start coming in?
Well, as I remember, in the spring of 1946.
Did some of the other dealers survive too, though, the war, didn't they?
Well, Perry Lewis was still here, and Galloway quit, but he reopened, but he didn't stay open during the war, and he reopened.
Was Tippett here by that time? Paul Tippett?
Oh yes, Paul Tippett was here. Paul Tippett was here, and
with the Chevrolet.
But he didn't do any. He didn't buy used cars like I did. Mm-hmm. He had half a dozen trucks and stuff, and he converted them to school buses, and he ran a bus service to Allison's in Indianapolis. And his salesmen became bus drivers and mechanics, and they had service night and day from his showroom to the Allison plant in Indianapolis.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how did you did not mention some of the other well-known brands of cars. You didn't mention Packard. Was Packard a factor here in Montgomery County?
Well,
that was a well-known brand.
Oh, Packard was a fine automobile, and I bought several Packards, and I bought them and resold quite a few Packards. Mm-hmm. And I would buy them out of Indianapolis, either from an individual or from a used car dealer, and then bring them over here and sell them. And I remember I sold them. Oh, I bet you I sold 2 or 3 down in Wayne Town, Packards. Mm-hmm. and they were Packard 6s.
How about the prices on it? Was Packard on the high end of the line on pricing?
No, the Packards that I bought were the 6 cylinders after they lowered the price, and they were about the same as a Buick or Chrysler.
Did the Cadillac and Lincoln and cars like that, were there many of those around Montgomery County? The high-priced cars?
Well, yeah, there've always been there have been more Cadillacs in Montgomery County than there have been Lincolns, but there were always a few Cadillacs around. Yeah.
Who sold Cadillacs?
Well, the only Cadillac dealer, the first Cadillac dealer was a man that came from Kokomo here, and he had Oldsmobile and Cadillac, and I can't think of his name now. And he had his place of business down back where there used to be a hardware store on down across from the Journal.
Oh, where the Strand Theater is there?
Oh no, that first block, the very first block off of Market.
Oh,
I can't think of his name. He was the first Cadillac dealer, and then after that, Herman Davis got it.
Or Paul Tippett, you mean?
Yeah, Paul Tippett and then Herman. Yeah.
What about Studebaker? Was Studebaker ever?
Well, we had a Studebaker dealer here. His name was Van, and his dealership, he had several stalls in what is now a parking lot for the Bank One, across the street from Bank One, where the old there was a garage across the street there. I can't think what the name of it was now, but he was a dealer for several years. This man, he came here from Kansas.
Mm-hmm. Russell, did before the war there was not much foreign? There were no foreign cars, were there?
No. You might as well say no foreign cars.
Mm-hmm.
No.
They started appearing after the war, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And
what were the first ones that made their appearance here?
Well,
Volkswagen, would that be the?
Well, Volkswagen, but they never had a Volkswagen dealer here.
No.
But you saw Volkswagens and Toyotas and Nissans and those were the main ones. They've never had a foreign dealer in Crawfordsville.
Why is that?
They will not. They won't go in that size town.
Mm-hmm. We're too small for them. Is that right?
Well, I don't know, but a town that of 10 or 15,000 population, about as small a town as you see foreign cars is Lafayette.
Russell, are there any other things we haven't covered here?
Well, I think we've pretty well covered we've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, well, that's all we want to do is talk.
Mostly talk, if you ask me.
Well, you've done some other things around town besides sell automobiles. You were on the hospital board for a while, weren't you?
16 years.
Mm-hmm. Culver Hospital Board.
Culver Hospital, 16 years. And I tell you, those were late hours.
Uh-huh.
We wouldn't meet till 8 o'clock at night, and we never got out till between 12 and 1 o'clock.
That was when it was a county hospital.
County hospital. That's right.
When did you first go on the hospital board?
Well, I don't remember for sure, but I think I could I think I must have been about. I think it must have been about. Well, it was after the. It was after. I think it was in world. It was after World War II. I know some of the other. Mary Shaver was.
She was on the board.
She was on the board with me, and Leslie Warner and Ladoga was on the board with me.
Yes, that's right.
And Preeb, Dr. Preeb was on the board
Yeah,
with
Dr.
me.
Preeb.
He died young, died very young.
His widow still lives here.
Yes.
Going back to the automobile business, Russell, I notice now that you've got not only Buick and Pontiac, but you've got the Chrysler line.
We have the full Chrysler line.
Chrysler line.
Well,
How do you feel about that?
we like it.
Do you?
This has been all engineered by my son, and he wrote a letter to Chrysler, or called him on the phone or something, and said that he would like to have the dealership for Dodge trucks. I sold trucks. I sold GMC trucks for 19 years, and then I gave them up because I found that the trucks and my new cars didn't mix in that same building, and I thought there was too small a town to put in an exclusive truck dealership. And so in those days we had larger, GMC made larger trucks. Now they don't make anything but pickups and 1 ton at the most. And so anyway, we felt we needed some trucks, and so my son John wrote to or contacted Chrysler and said he'd like to have Dodge trucks. And the first thing you know, a real nice gentleman called on him and said, "Well, Mr. Horner, I tell you, we'll give you Dodge trucks, but not only Dodge trucks, we'll give you the whole Chrysler line, Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth, and Dodge trucks, and all the vans, the minivans, and the Chrysler has outsold all the minivans, and one reason they have is that the Chrysler van is built on a regular van chassis. It's not built on a truck chassis, and it doesn't have as high a step to get into as the other competition. And so anyway, when Edwards a year before he quit the automobile business, told Chrysler he would like to quit and try to get a dealer come over, and they couldn't find anybody that was interested. And so then he quit, and then they went for way over a year, with no dealer at all.
With no dealer.
So they were glad to get any kind of a representation, and so it wasn't hard for us to get into business.
How does that work with General Motors, though? They didn't object?
No, they didn't. But you still have to get your price class. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, you've got to sell cars on the same level.
You have to. They keep track through vehicle registrations, and in a certain community, a certain line of cars has 9% of all cars sold, and another and that goes for every single make. And they know right now what kind of job every dealer's doing. And as long as as long as they don't care what else you sell, or at least General Motors doesn't, as long as you do price class for them. You have to do what they call national price class. And so anyway, and of course General Motors we haven't had a representative that's been to our dealership in 3 years. They don't even come around to see us. It's all done. It's all done through our computer, and we don't get mail come through the post office. We have a computer that we set when we leave the business, and it comes in overnight on a computer, and we just tear off a big long sheet, and there's a message from whatever they got to talk about. Don't use the post office.
Yeah. Russell, I don't know whether how have we done on time, Mike?
Well, we're still in good shape.
Are we? Why don't we take another little break here? Maybe you'll think of a few.
Oh, I don't know if you want to. Anyway, I went to the University of Illinois and took ROTC, and ROTC at that time at University of Illinois was horse cavalry.
That's right. My brother was at the University of Illinois.
Is that right?
Yeah, about
Well,
the same
anyway,
time you were.
You'd go out to the stable and you get on the horse, and the horse knew more about where it wanted to go than you did. And when you're in the horse cavalry, you don't say get up or whoa. You have what they call the military seat, and you sit up a certain place. And when you're if you want to go forward, you you work your knees together, and that alerts the horse that you're going to give a command. And your command is you just lean forward in your seat, and that means that tells the horse to go.
Yeah.
And when you want to stop, you don't say whoa. You lean back in your seat and squeeze your knees together. And so anyway, and then of course everyone at Illinois, these horses do all these drills just as well as the riders did. And we all in Illinois we all had sabers, and we take these horses and we put the saber way up on the horse's head, and then a whole bunch of people, the whole troop would go right after somebody on a horse with that saber sticking out in front. Boy, I can tell you, if you weren't well equipped down there, it would scare you to death. But anyway, so I just took 1 year. No, let's see. No, see, I forget. Did I have 1 year or 2? I had either one. I had whatever the minimum was, either 1 or 2 years, and it was in the horse cavalry, and but that had nothing to do with in being in the real army and going to the horse cavalry at Fort
Riley.
Fort Riley. And I got out to.
I'm leaving. I'll see ya.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Tomorrow. Have a good evening.
Thank you. And I got out there when I was just working and buying used cars and trying to take care of the motorist needs, because most of the dealerships had no mechanics. We had mechanics, but Van Dyke quit and Galloway quit, and Montgomery didn't have any mechanics, and we had to search for parts, and we had to go out and try to buy used cars and sell used cars. And I really worked hard. I was really working hard, and I was busy. Mm-hmm. Because I went to Pittsburgh and bought cars and brought them back here, and sometimes I'd have as many as 15 to 16 cars at one time. I'd drive back from Pittsburgh in that area.
Mhm.
And so here I got drafted in the Army, and when they didn't have shoes to fit me, I thought, well, they'll just go to they'll go down to Lake or some camp down in Georgia or Kentucky, and they'll get those shoes right to me. Hell, they were no more hurry to get my shoes than nothing. And there I was over there in Indianapolis, and you remember Will Stump at the Elston Bank?
Oh, sure.
He had a son that went in the Army the same time I did. And he was right ahead of me when we got our serial number, 352-469-06, and he was 05. And 6 months to the time that he was sworn in and I was sworn in, he went down and drowned in the Moselle River
I remember that.
in France.
Married to Katie.
That's right, Katie
Yeah.
was his wife. She later married Darst,
That's right.
Louis Darst. And then the time I went to the Army, I went with Bob Whitecotton, and Estill Bell was in the draft just before me, and John Berry was in my group going to Indianapolis, and Gordon Beamer, and we got over there, and it's the people in the medics all spoke of us. My God, who and how the hell did you get in? Well, they sent for me, you say. Well, my God, they're sure as hell scraping the barrel and send you over here to be in the Army. That's the way they talk. And if you had something wrong with you, you didn't want to go till you had free time. Because all they do is give you a physic, and that's all they do. If it was on time, you should be doing something, see?
Yeah.
So you want to go on Sunday. And if you had a bad cold and feeling terrible, you wanted to go on Sunday, because then they know that was your own time and that you must really have something wrong with you, not gold bricking, you know what I mean? The gold brick was a guy that claimed he was sick and had a bad back, or he didn't have a thing wrong with him.
Yeah. Well, you made Buck Sergeant, though.
Oh, I'll tell you how I made Buck Sergeant. After I'd been out to Fort Riley about 1 year, I contacted Maxine. Of course, I wrote her a letter every day, and so Maxine came to Fort Riley, and I rented a house right in Aggieville. Aggieville is where the university is, agricultural school, and they call that Aggieville.
Yeah.
And we had a house rented. They said they had control. I remember I rented the house for about $75 a month because they had rent control.
Yeah.
And so I went. I took my family. I rented a house, and then Maxine came out and lived there in Manhattan, Kansas. And that was a delightful experience here. I was in the Army, and she brought out a 1942 Buick. And
They were classic.
yeah, and it was, and I got a kick out of that because I immediately got riders from Champaign, or from, not Champaign, but got riders from Manhattan to the fort. And so I had these riders, and I had four rifles made, 5 of us in the car. And so how did it happen? that they were paying me $4 a piece, and
You were getting rich.
yeah, $4 a piece, and one of the writers was my first lieutenant. And on weekends, Maxine and I would have my first lieutenant into our house, and we would play bridge. But we couldn't go to
Officers Club.
officers. We couldn't go to the officers club, or we couldn't even go downtown to a hotel.
Yeah.
Because enlisted man couldn't have fraternized with an officer. But he'd come over to our house and stay till 12 or 1 o'clock playing bridge week after week.
Yeah.
And later I loaned him money to buy a car. He wanted to buy a car, and I loaned him money, took his note, and he paid me after the war was over. Yeah. And
So you made Buck Sergeant.
so when they had somehow or other something came along, I had to raise the price from $4. And so he said to me, he said, I was just a private, and he said, I tell you, he says, I could make you the table of, what do you call it?
Organization.
Or
TO.
TO. The TO called for the stenographer to be as much as a sergeant. So he made me to get $4 raise in the pay. Would you rather be paying extra money to ride, or would you rather have me make you a corporal? And I said, well, I'll be a corporal. A corporal does a damn sight better than a private.
Yeah.
And then later, and when we were playing bridge and everything, and I loaned him the money to buy a car, then he made me a buck sergeant. And that's how I got to be buck sergeant. My God, there's a hell of a difference between a private and a buck sergeant.
Yeah.
Or a private and a corporal. You go into the mess hall, and if you're a corporal or a buck sergeant, hell, they give you the best piece of meat. They fry your egg just right. They make your waffles just right, your pancakes just right. And hell, you're somebody out there.
I was a Buck Sergeant for a while too, Russ.
My God, a buck sergeant's good. I got there, and the only thing about it, I had to be on guard duty, and I'd have to go around. You know,
Yeah.
yes, when you're on 4 hours,
We all
all
did
4
that.
hours, and hut, hoop, heep, whoop, whoop, hoop, heep, whoop, hoop. Horse and ride, it'd be right in the middle of the night, you know. Hut, hoop, heep, whoop. I'd yell those out this louder than hell, thinking I could wake up somebody, but I never could. And so anyway, I learned a lot of the Army slang naturally. Yeah, yeah. If you had these big, anyway, we called it horse cock. What do you call horse cock in the Army? It was a great big, it was an overgrown wiener.
Wiener?
No, wiener.
Oh, wiener.
Wiener.
Oh, yeah.
Overgrown, much bigger.
Yeah.
And you come around, you call that horse cock.
Huh.
And you called, what else did you call this food? Everything had, everything was what the hell? Fucking this and fucking that. Everything was that way.
We better not.
You never heard such, and to tell you, you go in the Army, and after you're in the Army about 6 months, you've got a new vocabulary altogether. Haven't you, Bob? New vocabulary. You don't talk like a gentleman anymore.
Well,
You don't talk like a gentleman. I tell you, I got out to Fort Riley, and I I never went through such a, I tell you, I was very patriotic here in Crawfordsville, I thought. I got into Fort Riley and the clerk school was going to start a week from the time I got there. So they had a fuck up, we called it. They had a little fuck up, a corporal that was in charge of taking all us guys, keeping us busy. And they'd go out and give us the marching orders, and they would get us in the barracks, and you'd have to get down on the floor. You'd have to GI the barracks, then you'd have to get down on the floor with your knife in the crack and clean the cracks out in the boards. And then they'd line you. Everybody have to get on their bunk, and this little corporal, he'd be out in the troop street, and he'd blow the whistle, and you had to run down from the second story, and he'd time you with his watch to see how many seconds it took you to get lined up. And there was a guy that had been he'd been the vice president of a pretty big bank in Atlanta. And he was running down the steps real fast, trying to get out to Troop Street, and fell down and broke his ankle. And I never did see him. They sent him to the hospital and never saw him after that.
Oh, gosh.
But before that, though, when he'd get mad, he would, if he got real mad, he'd say, you're a goddamn Yankee. You're a goddamn Yankee. And boy, the Civil War was not over with him. Boy, you were just a damn Yankee. Well, anyway, you sure learn fast when you get in the Army.
You sure do.
Well, you turned out to be an officer, didn't you?
Yeah, I had to go to Fort Benning to get it, though. I went to the infantry school.
To the infantry school?
Yeah.
Well, all these guys that were in the horse cavalry, and they were messengers and cooks and bakers and all that, hell, as soon as they left, they went right into the infantry. They weren't in the horse cavalry anymore, they were in the infantry. And that's like our friend got right 6 months from the day he was sworn in.
Yeah.
He got killed.
He was dead.
Yeah.
Well, Russ, I think we better call this. I think we're probably about the end of this tape. So I will call it a halt here and appreciate all of your opinions and all of your memories of everything.
I never thought I'd be thinking about my life in the Army.
Well,
oh man, I tell you, I was. I tell you, I don't know whether I never was very. It was a very painful experience. See, when I went to the Army, I had been married. I had been married and had a business for 7, 8, 10 years or longer, and I had 3 children. And I got in the Army, and I was supposed to get what was it, $54 a month, something like that. And my papers got lost, and hell, I didn't get any money for about 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And if I hadn't have had a business and hadn't had some money, I don't know what the hell my wife would have done.
Yeah. The same thing happened to Escobal. He had kids too.
Oh yes, I say he did. Mm-hmm. And only he went over in France and went through the whole works.
I know he did. He was in the infantry.
Yeah, I say he was. But he was tough too.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll just call this a halt here